Hi there.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, good. Thanks for joining us today on the latest episode of the Community Staking podcast.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about who you are.
Cool. So I am Andy. I work in my day-to-day job as a product person within privacy and scaling explorations team that does apply cryptography with zero knowledge. But I'm also like super passionate about staking and community. So I form part of ETH which is an organization of like different Latam members trying to form communities and Ethereum communities within Latin America. And within that, also Kipu Stakers, which were focused on staking, which was it's what we're going to talk about. And also one of like leaders who are trying to foster that community in Costa Rica, which is where I'm from.
That's great, a brilliant summary. Thank you. So
Mhm.
yeah, today the plan is to just have a conversation a bit about yourself. The previous podcasts have been talking with a wide range of people. Everyone's got different backgrounds, different experiences. So we'd love to hear um, how you got to where you are now and how you got into crypto and those kind of questions. And then later on talking a bit about Lido and the Lido community. It's not anything pro Lido at all. It's we're not expecting that. It's just a conversation. It's an opportunity to have a more nuanced conversation than just screaming on than people shouting back and forth on X. It's just a way to bring some of those points to the community and share those thoughts and see what people think. So that's the goal from today, and hopefully that's good with you.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. That's good.
Brilliant. Okay, well let's get started then. So first question I'll be asking everyone is when did you get into crypto?
Oh boy. So that was 2016, was like final years in college and started to work. And I heard from a colleague about Bitcoin, as most people usually joins the space as the biggest mindshare, and just basically was fascinated about just thinking and reflecting of new concepts of money and self-sovereignty, I don't know, digital interactions, and then like this kind of like as most people, crypto is a rabbit hole. Like I just couldn't stop learning about it, and like I've always like my journey like professionally has been like always in tech, and yeah, basically was a great opportunity to just get full time in crypto because like basically for the last many years I was just like listening to podcasts, reading as many forum posts, like trying to participate in any community for hours and hours a day, and it's awesome to just like join and actually like put that on the like day job as well.
That's brilliant. No, it's great to hear. We've had people that joined really recently and people that have been around for a bit longer, and the
Yeah.
speed at which they jump down the rabbit hole changes as well. So you said you heard about it longer, but then it took to now to get a bit like more full time involved. Say so, yeah. It's
Yeah.
just hopefully it's for the people listening and watching. It's to say that there is no the perfect time was obviously the day Bitcoin was launched, and the second best time is now. Right, it's never too late to join, and you'll always
Yeah.
feel late to the party. That's something I certainly felt, but actually, the best time to join is always now.
Yeah. I actually, what made me kind of like apply and start looking actively was this podcast, Manifest show that I used to hear like every day, and they would just always finish like, look at job at Web3, like look at job at crypto, and I was like, yeah, why not, right? And apparently, or like there was an opportunity and there was a good fit, and I think there's so many needs right now from teams, protocols, and projects that really like with any type of experience people, if they're passionate about it and aligned, could like find a place to support and add value. So for sure.
Okay, great. And question as well to understand your technical background. Do you think you are more technical or more on the non-technical side, or where do you feel you fit on that spectrum?
Yeah, I feel like somehow technical. So I did I have never been like a developer myself or like full time at least, but I did graduated from mechatronics engineering, so that kind of like exposed me to some of like the technical concepts and some software. But my initial years were more like hardware testing, like signals, electrical stuff, and some software automation. And that kind of led me more into the managerial administrative roles on technical like teams, so like engineering manager and now like product stuff. So I feel like I can understand like well or somehow well like the technical concepts on a high level conceptually, but definitely if you get me into the weeds and like try put me into the right lines of code, like I'll be terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so somehow in between of that.
Okay. Yeah, I feel that staking does attract and have an interest for a wide range of people, not just the super technical, but the less technical and, as you said, like managerial side as well. Yeah, it covers all of that. One of the things to focus on, I know that you've been heavily involved with, is like the educational side, particularly with like ETHKipu and your connection with ETHStaker there. And we'll talk about that next, about how with that background and that experience, how you got into educating others about staking. I'd like to hear more about that and your experiences there. So what do you do with staking education, and how did you get into that?
Yeah, I would say like staking at the beginning, it could be very daunting, right? Like you hear some misconceptions in Ethereum, like you need a lot of capital, like 32 you need a lot of like super strong hardware and these like super like watch out for slashing and like all sort of like misconceptions. So I think like I started like actually like I did like liquid staking like 2 years ago, but like actually like myself trying to run a node and being a validator like more recently. So like less than a year. So in this journey, like I kind of like helped me a lot to see those communities that had like really good material and almost like learning paths. I think those things were really like organize some like all of the content that exists outside. So yeah, I definitely got involved initially with Keeper Stakers, which is just like a working team within it people, which I've said there's this community that tries to drive more Ethereum communities in Latin America. And Keeper Stakers is mirrored a lot in like its staker community, like trying to create something similar, but mostly in Spanish or Portuguese languages. Because there's a lot of good content in English, but not everyone like speaks English or understands it at like technical level. So how do we carry over some of that knowledge to these other communities, right? And be like closer to home, people that you know, that we can express better. So I think that's initially how I got started. And yeah, that's where the connections with the ETHStaker community are as well, like helping do the translation efforts that you also led for the knowledge base, and just overall like trying to look for opportunities to teach people about the staking ecosystem and the trade-offs, and just educate one. So we also host bi-weekly calls, like X spaces. You were also part of one of those. And like, yeah, I think just to educate, like what are the players in the ecosystem? What are things that you can do? What are trade-offs? People can ask questions. We are supporting like some people that receive nodes from like Ethereum Foundation's grant. They just like run a node. So trying to like, especially in this region, right, trying to make sure that they're not alone, that they can ask questions, that even some guides, maybe workshops soon. And yeah, I think we're starting to see that many communities could be financially sustainable if they adopt some sort of like community staking model. And I think like that could be a good avenue to explore and support. And in general, I think like we want to, like one of our mottos in people Keeper Stakers is like to help Ethereum decentralize geographically. And I think that's one of the reasons why we want to kind of like have some pull factor to Latin America to balance a bit the geography staking.
I think that's a really good point you've touched on. I mean, it's amazing to hear what you've been doing and how you're consistently helping people, like those regular X spaces, and just creating that community, particularly with the language aspect. So this is something, it's like you can have physical nodes decentralized all over the world. You can put boxes in places, but if we're talking about decentralization and resiliency, if it's just all in English and you can't reach those other communities, those are other barriers that are either being erected or not necessarily even thought about. It's just assumed knowledge. So having really strong communities in these other languages other than English around staking is a big part of decentralization that it's amazing that you're working on.
Yeah, and maybe it's not often talked about a lot. It's just because there are so many dimensions and aspects in which we can think about decentralization. But I think it's definitely important, right? Like decentralize the communities, like the languages, like the technical, other like implementations. I think there's so many things.
And a big part of it is we talk about the financial benefits of like running a node and the technological benefits and jobs in Web3 and all the perceived or current value, but just the fact that these communities can get involved, like feeling like they are part of it just by it being the content being in their language, or at least some part of the content being in their language is a huge improvement. The fact that they can feel involved, or even if they end up reading it in English for some of the more technical side, even just saying like you are part of this community, we are inclusive, is hugely important. So yeah, that's a underappreciated, or at least like not as often spoken about aspect of decentralization.
I agree. And again, for me, like communities are one of the most important aspects for like an ecosystem. Like it can't all be like impersonal, like those are tutorials, anybody like go there by your own, or rather like feel this like there's some sort of network that you can ask questions, you get to know them a little bit better on the human aspects as well. So yeah, I think for sure that's important to share certain like challenges, languages, expressions. I don't know, that helps to build trust.
It's great. So yeah, I mean, I was involved, as you know, with the Eaststaker. That's how we got connected, translating the Eaststaker knowledge base. So I worked on most of the English content, and then you and your team, you helped coordinate the Spanish translations, which was brilliant. So that's pretty much 100% translated from English into Spanish. So every article is available, and I'd recommend anyone from the Spanish speaking communities that's listening to this or is involved to definitely check that out, because it was a massive effort from a huge number of translators that got involved. So yeah, really grateful for that as a resource for the entire community.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And we also are right now doing like bi-weekly, I think, like newsletter or monthly newsletters for Rhino as well. Like we do the translation from English to Spanish, and that's also like helping to get more people involved. So yeah, I think there will be so many other things besides just translation, but also like just to increase the knowledge and information and the communication in other languages.
Hugely, yeah, and I like that. As you said, there was the EtherFi X Spaces recently this week, and that was talking about a different staking protocol there. And it's just to have all these connections. It's a different world that we're in, particularly staking. I mean, you could argue that everything in crypto are all on the same team, but it can be quite hard because the mentality, particularly from traditional markets and the finance world, is to be in direct competition and to kill the competitors, right? There can only be one. It's right. You know, Google doesn't want to be 20% of search with 5 other equal competitors. It wants to be 80, 90%, 100% of search if it could. So, and there are huge market advantages to that. So it's a different world where we're trying to actually like encourage, and it's a lot more open to say like you are incentivized to be a team player, and that does need to be like constantly reminded and maintained, because the easiest path is to become the biggest and to do. There's an old book, it's like the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It's about how to become the biggest company and just crush all the competition, but that isn't necessarily the goal, and building communities shows that isn't always the case. So yeah, it's hugely important.
Right. Yeah, I think those are values that we definitely need to take, and also in the staking space particularly, like you don't want to become the single point of failure or centralization because you grew too big and everything, like you absorb the ecosystem. Otherwise, like that plurality makes the pie bigger for everyone. So I feel like, definitely that's a mindset to have.
Great. Well, let's segue then onto talking a bit about the staking protocols and some questions around Lido, but also feel free to talk about anything else you want or bring anything to this section. But the question to get us started with is like, what's your opinion on Lido at the moment, and what do you think the Ethereum community in general's opinion of Lido is today?
Yeah, I'll feel so there's a broad, so I'll say there's a spectrum, right? Within the Ethereum community, there are some who are super involved in it day to day, and there's some others who are like from the outside, like just getting to know and just see Lido as a great product. Like myself in the day to day, I do feel that although Lido accomplished an important role in the ecosystem, like providing like liquid staking and other sort of derivatives and like collateral, like there are so many good things that have come up, and but also it poses a great threat for like Ethereum's decentralization, credible neutrality, and like choke points. So I would say like Lido is big right now. It's like the biggest protocol, but I think it just needs to be very careful of not absorbing, as we were saying, like the whole ecosystem and then becoming having this mindset of like, let's grow it infinitely and then like exclude the rest of other protocol solutions. So I would say like with some reserves that Lido does have a risk for Ethereum if it continues to grow as it is.
Yeah, absolutely agree. If it was 60-70% of the stake, even if it was just slightly more every amount that it grows, those risks that you said increase. They don't go away if you ignore them. And the team, the Lido DAO contributors, are very aware of what's being said about them and also of the risks involved. So we can talk more about that in a bit. What's actually going on inside, like behind the scenes, a little bit more, and understanding the roadmap. So the way I've been describing it, and your summary was great. It's exactly, that is the community vibe at the moment. Not necessarily everyone's on the complete extremes of not everyone's saying like Lido's perfect, and not everyone's saying like Lido's evil. We should fork out the code base right now. But the nuance lies somewhere in the middle. But it is something to be aware of, and it can't be ignored. So with that, it's to say, well, where is Lido today, and what's its direction? So an analogy that I've given to people asked about is like, how's it different to say there's L2s that are very centralized with multi-sigs, and some of the biggest complaints around Lido are like, well, the DAO's got a few big players and that controls the protocol, therefore it's centralized control. But I'd ask you, what are the differences, for example, between Lido in that situation versus an L2 today? Like, why is that one okay and not the other?
I think both are not great. I think you do want, like layer twos in general don't have a control, or an influence that big on the layer one, like protocol development, or even like, well, some cases, but also on the, like governance. And I think one of the risks that apparent to be is that through the permission like mechanism, like you can eventually form sort of consortium group that could, cause some censorship to certain groups, or just like prioritize and keep accumulating power within the ecosystem. If there was a layer two that grew in size and basically start infiltrating, in like consensus client teams and other like government decisions, that would be a great danger. So I feel like in general, like we do want a plurality on layer twos, and make sure there's clear distinction of powers and a division. Whereas like with Lido, I think it's very similar. Like we don't want like an LDO token to become like a governance token for Ethereum, or a choke point for, agencies and other outside people.
Absolutely. I think that's the key thing. That's why I asked the question. It's like, it's the size that matters. If there was an L2 that held 30% of ETH in a single multi-sig wallet as the bridge, then everyone would be terrified of that. So it's mainly about size, and it's not intentions. And when you're early stages, and people are saying things like, well, why don't Lido self-limit, is one of the big things. It's like, why don't Lido say, no, we're going to limit and not take any more stake? And that is something that Lido did vote on, and the resounding majority said, no, we don't want to do that. And that's taken
and
to
what
mean,
do you think?
I was saying that the outcome of that vote is that's taken to mean, therefore, because Lido doesn't want to self-limit because it voted to not, therefore the obvious reason for that is because they want to be as big as possible, right?
I guess I've seen other like takes from like other like prominent members within the Lido community about like, let's not limit ourselves, like we can like remove the evil. And I think there's always like this phrase that is very powerful, that is like, let's not just not be evil, but can't be evil, right? That Vitaly keeps repeating. Like I think like, even if there isn't the intention, but you keep growing and taking most of like the power, like the market share, like there could be a time in which the people who are in charge, or like the holders, change their mind and they do leverage that power. And now that you bring that, like that voting aspect, like I was just reviewing that numbers earlier today, and it seems like there was like, I keep hearing this, and I want to hear what the community thinks about it. Like the vote was less than 10% of like the holders, and the three top voters basically swing like more than 50% of the voting power. So the three biggest voters who voted do not self-limit would have switched sides. Like three people or three like wallets, like the result will be the other one, it'll be like the opposite. So it feels like, yeah, like it's not like the Lido community voted for this. Maybe like in practice it did, but like or in theory it did, but like it's not like the amount of people, but rather like the amount of voting power. So I don't know. It feels like there's like a plutocracy behind the Lido community token.
Yes, and that is a general discussion around just DAO governance in general, right? So that's not a Lido specific problem you've just described. That's any DAO or any organization. And the issue is, the difficulty is that the further you go to fully proportional representation voting, and everyone gets a vote and things like that, you end up no one votes, you get voter apathy, so it's really hard to get anything done. So having like more centralized control means you can develop and move faster, but that creates centralization risks. And as you said there, like only a few people could have changed that entire vote. So was it the will of the community, or was it the will of those few people?
Yeah. What does the community said, or like, did they give a follow-up about like those big voting holders?
I'm currently writing a blog post to follow up on the first one called LDO, Who Holds the Power, which is going to cover exactly what we're talking about now, and might be released by the time this video goes out. So because I would like to ask those questions as well, and to understand, well, who are those large voters and how have they voted, but also understanding like distribution and how many people normally vote. And it's very hard when it comes down, because that's just discussions on DAO governance at that point. But at least making it clear like how it works, so that it's not ambiguous, would be helpful. So with that, with the LDO and voting is a big issue, as you just said, like as the protocol gets bigger and the size, the influence it can have. Now there are ways to limit that. Now I've talked about this previously on this podcast, is dual governance. So dual governance with the actual state asset. So the idea being that, so don't be evil and can't be evil. That was a great example. It's like, well, how do you move towards can't be evil? What are the options from where we are today to moving towards that? Now, dual governance is one option that helps, and that means that state ETH voters have the ability to veto changes. The idea being that if there was a governance proposal that was negative to Lido or to Ethereum or to staked ETH, or all three, or everything at once, then the staked ETH holders could block proposals and changes to the protocol. Now that creates a bit of like a stalemate situation where can't influence change. They can't propose changes, but they also can block what they perceive as negative changes, which does create a check on power, as we were saying, like a can't be evil step towards can't be evil, because the token the actual end users have a say.
Yeah, I would say like it is a step forward, but I wouldn't say like it's enough, and I wouldn't say that it's as like powerful to kind of like see all this kind of say to answer all the centralization risks that like exist, right? I don't know. It seems like a second line of defense. Yeah, it seems like a second line of defense. You still like can argue like there are some like big voters or big holders that will still have like outsized leverage in those second one. And as you said, like there's both their apathy. There are other DAOs problems, and I still don't see like everything be fully governance to be the solution. So yeah, I've read briefly like the dual governance proposal, and I feel like it's limited to the critiques, I'll say, that are still existing from the broader Ethereum community, I feel.
Yeah, and as you say, it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it is a step in the right direction. Now, you could go further. What's an even better way to can't be evil? Well, an ossified, non-upgradable contract, that would do it, right?
Yeah.
And that could be, in theory, done today, but what would that entail? Like the risk of bugs not being able to be fixed. It's the same conversation we say L2s. It's like, why don't they ossify today? It's like, well, they're not ready. And the difficulties with Lido, you could say like, well, it's also not ready because it's still being developed. V2 and modules and things like that require changes and require the ability to make changes, but it's also very, very large in Ethereum. So the changes it makes have a huge potential impact. Similar, you could argue, to Ethereum itself. It's like, well, why doesn't Ethereum just stop being developed? And it's like, oh, well, it's not finished yet. There's Vitalik's roadmap, or there's just the general consensus that there's still more to be done. So that's the trade-off, and this is why looking at where Lido could get to, it's all based on time. It's, well, why isn't it like that today, and what would it look like in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, I would feel like as well, like I'll feel better if there's a roadmap of ossification, right? Like about like and at least an intention about saying like, okay, in this amount of time we will be touching like this big protocol changes. I feel like that is important. And I feel like again, like for me, one of the I want to keep bringing it up because there are smarter ways to self-limit yourself that signal that like concern. Like again, like I would still feel like yeah, there are like this proposal about like increasing rates once you're like above certain thresholds. So like the Lido token holders like get that revenue, additional revenue, but without, you know, like, and the markets like try to pull you down because yeah,
Yes,
what is the take on that?
That was Vitalik's
Yeah.
post, right, about that. So I'm not an absolute tokenomics expert and economist, and it's not obviously not financial advice anyway. It's just, so my understanding is that anything that so Lido is a very efficient, very capital efficient machine. You put ETH in, and it can, and any amount of ETH, and it can essentially like instantly and infinitely spin up new validators, and that is the best capital efficiency you're going to get. And the only things that can match that capital efficiency are centralized operators like Coinbase or Kraken or Binance. So the difficulty is there, like anything that like it could have self-limit, or it could, as you said, increase the percentage take. But the question isn't so much like how does Lido self-limit, it's like where does that state go to if it doesn't go to Lido? And the evidence shows that it doesn't flow to solo stakers, and because there aren't protocols yet that can absorb that ETH, and not just absorb the ETH on a small scale, because obviously there are protocols permissionless like Rocket Pool that can. But the idea, and something I wrote about in the previous blog post, was if someone had $100 million worth of ETH today, and they were going to put it in a single place and stake it, they wouldn't necessarily stake it themselves. They'd look for an LST to do that. And you've got something like Coinbase, which is incredibly centralized and has a very high staking fee, or you've got something like Lido, where it's fairly well established, and you would look at that and say, great, it can take it and absorb it as fast as possible given queues and things like that, versus bonded requirements where you have to wait for that bond to match it. So even if it was a 10% bond, you'd still have to wait for $10 million worth of ETH to be available to match it, and you'd be sat waiting, losing or not getting rewards on that capital while you're waiting. So that capital efficiency is a problem at scale in markets, and that issue isn't solved by increasing rates. It just pushes the stake elsewhere. Now, if there were other options, like why isn't there, I've always thought, like, why isn't there just a complete clone of Lido? Why hasn't someone just forked Lido's code base and made a, you know, Fido or something, just like a complete Lido 2.0?
And what's yeah, and why do you think that's the case? I still don't know.
Well, I think Lido is it's very effective at what it does. Other people are trying to, all the other staking protocols that are coming along are trying to iterate on like niche like edge features
of parameters.
Yes, they're tweaking parameters, or coming out with entirely new systems like a bonded DVT, like Diva with their one ETH DVT bond that they're developing right now. So there are like big shifts like that, but they still require bond, and they will still have these capital efficiency issues. So as far as a direct competitor to Lido, like nothing's like that has been done directly. But you also have huge network effects of something like Lido with liquidity, and if someone did have a huge amount of ETH, so you could, my view on it is there's this gulf between, like, if you have a very small amount of ETH, then you can go with these smaller players, or you can have you don't need to worry about that capital efficiency as much because it's absorbable. And if you have a huge amount of ETH, you actually want it to be a liquid token, and you want to go with the biggest player because of the Lindy effects and various things. So I think the main reason is the gap between small to big. Even if you clone Lido today, that hurdle is quite hard to get over. In defense of Lido, it's just a complete market forces analysis, right?
Yeah, and I think that it helps like the first mover advantage, and there's a cold start. Even if I were to fork it today, like how many people would trust me? Even if I use the same like validator, like operating nodes, node operators, like would they also like trust in the protocol? I don't know. Like there's like this movement, but I do feel that what you're talking about, and maybe the community, like community, is like we should expand or keep growing, because if we don't, then the centralized exchanges grow too much. I'll still have yet to like hear like more I don't know, like stronger argument, and I will say like what that means is that we need like more institutional grade decentralized protocols. I think that's in a nutshell what we should be looking for.
Yeah, and I think again, looking at the conversation on a timeline, would it be it's to do with like stickiness, like how sticky stake is. So it's easy potentially. This is something you could say is you could be like, oh well, it's okay. Well, like Lido, maybe if Lido get to like 35, 36%, but that's okay because at least it's not in Coinbase. But then later on we can go down. Now it's that later on that they could get lower, as in they could have stake, either stake reduced or that as a percentage it could go down because as more ETH is staked into other protocols, for example. Now that's great in theory, it's a nice thing to say, but as we've seen, like ETH is incredibly sticky, and one of the complaints from the community was when the withdrawals were enabled, there was this expectation that there was going to be this mass exodus from Lido. Like everyone knew Lido's evil, right? So everyone, as soon as they can withdraw, that's the reason they're with Lido. It's because they can't escape. They're all prisoners being held captive, and as soon as withdrawals are enabled, everyone's going to just exodus and leave because there are better options available. But that's not what happened.
Yep.
Now, as we talked about the capital efficiency reasons, that could be part of it. The stickiness is another part. And there's the tragedy of the commons thing. It's like, oh, well, as long as if I hold staked ETH with Lido, that's okay. But yeah, for the benefit of Ethereum, everyone else should move to somewhere else. A bit like the client diversity, right? It's like, oh, you move to someone else and you take on that risk or that lower reward because it's like martyrdom. You're taking the hit for the chain. Thank you for your service. But me personally, I'll stay with the big player. So, and that's potentially part of it as well. It's all these reasons add up, and there wasn't this mass exodus. It actually grew. So keeping it at the level it is today is it could always be less as a percentage. But the next thing to talk about is, well, if it is what it is, Lido exists today, it can get bigger or smaller, or those are the two options, I guess, or stay the same. But actually looking at Lido itself, what else can we change? Not just the percentage and the size. So the other thing to talk about is the operators. So right now do you know how many Lido operators there are today?
I don't know. Within the Lido, like 20, like
so there are 31 plus 7 that have been onboarded. So it's between 31 and 38 as of me saying this. So yes, it's about that, and those are all permission KYC'd bondless operators that get given ETH as they get onboarded. Now, do you know any of the operators? Do you know the names of any of them?
I know one, Sensei Node, because they're like from Latin America, and that was a big one.
Yes,
news
so Sensei Node are one of the new operators. They're one of the newly onboarded operators, so they're fairly new. It's a lot of the client teams. So you've got like Nethermind, Prism, like all these teams are operating nodes on Lido as well. So Lido, the faceless, evil organization, it's like, oh, they must be bad because they're all centralized. But the actual individual operators themselves, they are known teams. They are, as you said, Sensei Node, well known in their communities. So individual, I've said it as every single person I've spoken to in as a Lido contributor seems like a nice person. They believe in Ethereum and they are actually working towards Ethereum goals. But the emergent property, when you put everyone together and group them and call them Lido, evil. It's like it's this emergent property that comes from lots of good people.
Yeah, I would say like Lido is not evil. It's just unhealthy if it grows more than 1/3, or at least level that is right now. And I would say like there's a counter argument that you've probably heard it, that is like if client teams are also like node operators, like they are kind of like want to like remain or keep Lido and have their best interest because of like the how do you say their backs, like, right, they care about that, so they wouldn't want to hurt themselves and their businesses. So
it's
there's
a
like
good
a
income
counter argument to that.
If you're a client team running validators, you're testing your own software and also making an income from that. So I agree. And there's also something that I've been thinking about recently is this idea of like greenwashing is something where you like a company plants one tree and says like, we're green now, right? And there's also something that said it's like anyone that even is seen to be even near Lido, like in the sphere of influence of Lido, it's like paid shill, and it's like that must be it. Like they must have been tricked into it or something. It's like, well, actually, it is hard because even just being associated or like having these conversations or being associated or talking about Lido does lend support, indirect support to it. Just by even having this conversation, it either validates or, unless you're saying don't stake with Lido, anything else that is said could be seen as, oh, therefore Lido isn't as bad, maybe I'm okay to use it, versus being told like, just no, never touch it, they're bad. So I do understand why like that is a concern of the community. It's like anything that could be seen as neutral is still taken as relatively pro. It's not reducing Lido's stake, so therefore it's pro Lido, I guess.
Yeah, as we were talking earlier, like there's a lot more nuances in the world, and it's so hard to discuss them and like iron them out like in a very short conversation. So that's why it tends to generate more clicks, more news, this polarizing like attitudes. I feel like yes, again, like my stance is like Lido isn't healthy at this point, and if it continues to grow, and there are good things that can happen on the protocol at like Lido level, but I think size is one of the ones that will signal the most like self-limiting, like will signal the most on value alignment until we make sure like the other like dangers are ironed out. I think I don't foresee like Lido coming to 60-80% like in the upcoming months, or but and you can argue like we can always have the social layer, but it does affect right now even like the credible neutrality of Ethereum, and there are steps from like the Lido community members and the general like Ethereum community that we need to do to make sure like it's not easily captured, nor Lido nor Ethereum, right? So yeah, I agree with you. Like there's always this easy risk of saying like, if you're not with me, you're against me, and you have the opposite position, and that's not like intellectually honest, but there are trends, or there's a spectrum. Yeah,
there's I guess like side note is that, so I got involved with crypto and thought it was interesting, particularly Ethereum, was because I previously worked in my Web2 life, working on these centralized platforms, these marketplaces, where I build things and then wake up every day and cross my fingers and be like, I hope I'm still allowed to have an app on that app store or that marketplace, because it was to the whim of the gods, the people that I had nothing, I didn't have any control over it. Whereas the promise of Ethereum is to say like, no, if you deploy it and it's your application, like no one can stop you. It's permissionless. And that's how it should work. Now, if I woke up every day and, as lots of people in the Ethereum community probably do, and think like, oh, well, I just work for Lido, like Lido have control. Like if the Lido DAO changed their mind over something, they could capture the protocol and essentially working for them, right? In that indirect way. And that's not good. And I absolutely agree. The main reason I'm here having this conversation with you and trying to write content and be a voice to Lido from the staking community, a more constructive voice, is because I don't want that to happen either. Like I don't want all of this effort and energy to go into a complete Lido capture, and no one that I've spoken to as a Lido DAO contributor feels that way either.
Yeah, I guess like that's the intention attitude that we have right now, which is really awesome, and I think that's the prerequisite to like make a change. And I think right now the change is like all these initiatives, but also like the immediate one is like making sure like Lido doesn't like overpass these like danger thresholds.
Yes. So
I feel
there is like market forces, like it's nice to like social consensus and social pressure can be applied, and it does get exponentially louder and louder. Like if Lido was 35%, I'm sure like the only thing on Twitter would be that, like every post would just be that, right? Like, and that's because the social consensus has to increase exponentially, because that's how it's viewed. Like, when the perceived enemy is at the gate and they break through, like you don't just stop talking about it, right? That's the perception, and I understand why that's how it's seen. But if it's a market forces problem, then it will have to be a market forces solution. So all these other staking protocols that are coming online, they should be able to, if they can provide a good product, take stake away from Lido, or a percent, increase the percentage. So it's a timing issue, and Lido right now is the main character because they're the biggest. If Eigenlayer, for example,
that's another one.
People think that'll suddenly take up a huge amount of stake, and there'll be other issues there. So I understand this is just the narrative right now, and has been for a while, because obviously staking over the last year has been a huge deal. It obviously longer as well, but particularly it's been the main story for the last year with the changes in the centralization. So
Yeah.
To touch on then the next point. So even if Lido as it is, as we said, like the goal isn't to make it bigger. My contribution is hopefully to make it better, and to say that we've got these 30. Lido have these 31 to 38 operators right now in Lido, but how do we turn that into 100 or 1,000 or 5,000? Because it's not just one problem or the other. We can't just say, if it was just like, oh, Lido's now either ossified or has none of these centralization problems and the DAO's perfect, you'd still be like, well, why is there only 38 operators? Like, that's not fair. That's not decentralized. So even if you solve the governance issue, you've still got the operator problem, right? And that's the issue that I'm hoping to participate on with this Lido community and the V2 modules that will allow for bonded operators and larger number of operators from the taking from the staked ETH and taking it away from some of the larger operators. So right now we have single Lido operators that have potentially 1% of Ethereum stake as a single operator, because Lido has about 30 operators and about 30% of the Ethereum stake, right? So
yeah,
there are ways also to funnel some of even the existing stake, but any new stake to those permissionless operators. So just getting them on board, and that's the active work that's being done by the Lido DAO participants right now, is to make that happen. So you've got to solve both problems, or at least work towards that as a solution. And my hope is that in future Lido becomes either smaller as a percentage, or the governance problems, or like it gets better. Like from here, if we spoke in a year's time, and this is what I'm hoping to do, is come back to these conversations with these interviews and the guests and say like, well, we spoke last year and these were your concerns. Like, here's what's changed. Do you feel better about it? Do you feel it's gotten worse? And actually see some of that progress over a longer period of time.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like we do have to do the push, and eventually other problems will arise. Like, I feel like ecosystem is just like one landmine here, another one here, just to become, again, like credible, neutral, censorship resistance, like resistant to capture, etc. And I think it's like, as I said, like, it's really good that you are there and that you're having these conversations, and that people are hearing like the critiques from like the broader community. So there can be some things done about that. So yeah, permissionless like node operators is a good step forward, and I think there will be other issues to tackle as well, on the governance, on the ossification, on the contract layer.
Yep. So, and to say that there's fun on that, like the Lido DAO countries are very aware of these problems, and I've said it before, like if I took a snapshot, like a short recording of some of the conversations that they're having on these calls about the protocol development things, if I shared that and didn't say it was from Lido, no one would believe it. And then I said, oh, by the way, that was Lido. Like, no one would believe it. Like, these are so pro Ethereum. Like, these people are fighting. Like, it was like, oh, well, maybe we need to delay this, because it's like, no, like they're passionately like shouting, like, no, like the only way we're going to get to hundreds or thousands of permissionless operators, and the only way we're going to get to 10, 20, 30% plus of the Lido stake on permissionless decentralized operators is to push this now. And that's the hill they're going to die on. Like, that's what's being fought internally, and hopefully can bring some of that conversation outside, so people can see that it's not as clear cut. It's just shouting at Lido and saying like, be better, is hard when these are real people that wake up every day and are trying their best. And I also don't think it would be the best thing for Ethereum if all these really like talented Lido contributors said like, oh, I'm so sick of all this hate, I'm just going to leave. And like, on the one hand, people are like, yay, Lido's like falling apart, but like, that's not actually like, in that way, that's not the best thing for Ethereum, for Lido to suddenly have like worse engineers or people leaving. Like, that's not good either. So it's trying to walk a very fine line and not going to one extreme or the other, but there's a huge amount of nuance. And I'm really glad we got to speak about this today with someone like yourself, who, as very clearly, it's not about being pro Lido, it's about being pro Ethereum, and how we can help and push and make sure Lido continues on that path.
Yeah, I agree. It's important, it's needed, and it's for the benefit of like Ethereum, like the broader Ethereum community, and even like the Lido community, like for it to succeed with Ethereum in a healthy state, right? So yeah, I agree.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. All of your comments and feedback has been great. It's very different to the previous comments again that we've had, and the guests from a really wide background has been yeah, inspiring to hear, because everyone is aligned, and when you put all these conversations together, it's inspiring. I have these conversations and feel really empowered that we can actually make a change, and that this conversation isn't just shouting into the void like it can sometimes feel like. It can make a difference. We just have to stand up and make the change happen. So thank you so much for being on today, and yeah, hopefully catch up again in a few months' time or later to see the progress and talk about that as well.
Yeah, we love it. And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I think it's super important topic. So many things that we could have talked many hours more, I bet. But yeah, it's good that we have this.
That's great. All right. Well, thanks, Andy. I'll speak to you soon.
Awesome. Cheers. Take
Thanks.
this.
Bye.
Bye.